Early in the morning, I am in a nest of Jews. They have cleverly shifted their shapes. One of them has taken the form of a little old woman. You can barely see her horns. She have tried to poison me already. These rats are very clever.
Okay, so what I'm going to address in this video is the claim that many people on the internet throw around quite a lot. What the claim is that the Jesuits, the founders, including Loyola, were in fact crypto-Jews. That's right, folks. Whenever there's any opposition given to the idea that it's a Jew world order or that the Zionist Jews run the world, whenever there's any opposition to that theory given forth, and I've done it myself in the past, that it's the Jesuits that are in control of things, and that is swiftly met with, aha, but yes, Loyola was a crypto-Jew. And basically they call him a Marrano, which was what they called Jewish converts in Spain to Christianity, and Marrano means pig. So you can see here Marrano in Spanish history is a Jew who converted to the Christian faith, basically Catholics, to escape persecution, but who continued to practice Judaism secretly. So, as I said, the claim is that Loyola was one of these crypto-Jews, or hidden Jews. And so therefore, if that is the case, then the Zionist Jews have been in control of the Jesuits from the beginning. So, is there any truth to this claim? What can we find to refute it, if anything? And it turns out that there is something that refutes it, and refutes it rather soundly. Once you've heard this, I don't think you can continue on saying that Ignatius Loyola and the other two founders of the Jesuits, Francis Xavier and Peter Faber, were crypto-Jews. So, who was Ignatius Loyola? So, Ignatius Loyola was a Spanish priest and theologian who founded the religious order called the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits, and he became its first superior general. He is the top man, the man in charge. There is no other above him. The Jesuit order was the military arm of the Catholic Church, and they had two objectives. The first was to put in check the Protestant Reformation, and the other is to restore papal power to what it once was, which is complete despotism. So, in the book The Jesuits in History by Hector Macpherson, written in 1914, there is a quote that's regarding the time period of Loyola's wandering around and hiding in caves. The quote is, "Accidentally, the discovery was made of his, being Loyola, noble birth, and as a consequence, interest in him was greatly increased. To avoid publicity, Ignatius found a convenient cave, which he made into a hiding place." Okay, so here in this book in 1914, it makes the statement that Loyola has noble ancestry. So what does this mean? So there's a genealogy of Inigo Lopez de Loyola. That's his proper Spanish name. And if you trace it back, his relatives, you'll see that the Onaz family is involved. So who are the Onaz? Well, the Onaz, just like Loyola, they are what are called Basque. Now, what are Basques? So if you don't know, Basque is a country, pretty much all of its own, and it's situated between the border of France and Spain. So the Basque country is a name given to the home of the Basque people in the Western Pyrenees that straddles the border between France and Spain on the Atlantic coast. So you can see here, this is where it lies. This is France, this is Spain, and this is where the Basque people live. So why is this important? Well, here we see the ancestry of modern Iberians, that's Spanish and Portuguese, is consistent with the geographical situation of the Iberian Peninsula in the southwest corner of Europe. So here, studies have been done recently. So it says, indeed, studies point to Eastern Mediterranean genetic contribution to Iberia to have been driven primarily by historical rather than prehistorical population movements. And here there's Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Jews and Levantine Arabs rather than earlier Neolithic farmers. So Eastern Mediterranean genes in Spain came way of historical rather than prehistorical population movements. Now the prehistorical ones are the movements of the Jews. Okay, so that takes them out of the equation. So here you can see it says the Basque region in northern Spain is the most genetically distinct and typically Atlantic European. Furthermore, the Basque region and Catalonia hold the least Eastern Mediterranean ancestry in Iberia. So if you don't know, Eastern Mediterranean is Israel. You can't get more east on the Mediterranean Sea than Israel. So let's just read that again. The Basque region in northern Spain is the most genetically distinct and typically Atlantic European. And if you're not convinced of that, we can take it a step further. So, ancient DNA, Basque origins. Researchers find that the people of northern Spain and southern France are an amalgam of early Iberian farmers and local hunters. Now this article was done in 2015, so it is pretty new. The mysterious origins of the Basque people of northern Spain and southern France have become a little clearer thanks to DNA extracted from centuries-old human remains unearthed in a Spanish cave. Nearly 700,000 Basques who speak a globally unique language and retain genetic patterns that distinguish them from other Europeans seem to be descendants of Neolithic farmers who mixed with local hunters before becoming, now this is key, genetically isolated from the rest of Europe for millennia. So what does this mean then, folks? Well, this means that the Basque people are not in any way, shape or form genetically related to Jews. Not at all. Ignatius Loyola was a Basque. Francis Xavier was also a Basque. Peter Faber was French, I believe. Just a little bit more about Loyola and his family tree. This is the Onaz family crest. The Loyola crest is the ancient heraldic crest of Ignatius' family. Ignatius descended from the Onaz and Loyola families, represented on the left and right sides of the crest, respectively. The set of 7 red bands on the field of gold was conferred on the Onaz family by King Alfonso XI of Castile in reward for the heroism, loyalty, bravery, and dedicated commitment shown by 7 brothers in the Battle of Boyoteba in 1324. This is undisputable. Loyola's family goes way back in the Basque region. and they are in there with nobility and royalty. They're nothing to do with the Jews. They're not genetically related to the Jews at all. So these Marranos, or the converted Jews that converted merely to avoid persecution and practiced their religion in secret, DNA studies appeared to support the idea that the number of forced conversions has been significantly underestimated, as 20% of the tested Iberian population had haplogroups consistent with Sephardi ancestry. Now the Sephardi are Spanish Jews, so the Marranos, or crypto-Jews as they're called, their DNA was tested and found that they had DNA consistent with Sephardi ancestry. So we know the DNA of the crypto-Jews, and it relates to the actual Sephardi, the original Jews that were in Spain. The Basques are completely different from that. They have been genetically isolated from the rest of Europe for millennia. So these tests that were done on 700,000 Basques and these centuries-old human remains is identical. The Basques have not changed for thousands of years. This puts to bed the idea that the founders of the Jesuits were indeed crypto-Jews. To continue saying such a thing just jeopardizes your reputation, because it is disinfo, it is false, there is no truth to it whatsoever.
Let's wake them up then, shall we?
So the Jews in early years were persecuted, and they went 400 years under Muslim rule. The Jews flourished more than ever before. They enjoyed a time of prosperity, creativity, and achieved great strides in poetry and rabbinic literature, medicine, and philosophy. So successful was this period that the latter half became known as the golden era of the Jews in Spain. So what happened next is a fanatical Almohads and their ultimatum, Islam or death. Many Jews fled north to Christian Spain, where the Reconquista was making its slow progress. Now, if we jump forward a bit in time here, a succession of humanist kings in Christian Spain from the 11th to 14th centuries showered the Jews with honours and favours because of their economic and creative abilities. Ferdinand I of Castile, and this is in 1027 to 1065 was his reign, granted the Jews equal rights with Christians and even gave them important positions in his court. Now this is the beginning of what is known as the era of papal court Jews. Okay, the Jews were given high positions in the courts next to kings so that they could mediate between the Pope and the king when it came to finances. Now this is still happening today. This is why later on the Rothschilds and families such as that, this is how they gained power. The Rothschilds are called the guardians of the papal treasury. Continuing in Loyola and the Jews, Jewish prestige and power were especially evident in the court of Toledo, the capital of Castile, and among the nobles. No king was without a Jewish minister, councillor or physician. Assuming control of court finances, Jews also lent money and collected taxes. Envy of their success mounted over the years, however, to such a fever pitch that in 1391, 4,000 Jews were killed in Seville. Carnage spread throughout Spain, sweeping through 70 Jewish communities, until in the end, some 50,000 Jews were dead, and many more had been baptized. In some districts, not a single Jew was left. So the presence of this large number of newly baptized Jews, or conversos as they were called, would to a large extent determine the future of Jews in Spain. Many adhered outwardly to Christianity, but in varying degrees continued secretly to practice Judaism. This is where we get the term crypto-Jew, which just means hidden Jew. By 1492, not one Jew remained in Spain. It cites the establishment of the Inquisition, segregation of Jews into separate quarters, and expulsion of the Jews from Andalusia as steps that were taken, but still the conversos problem remained. The decree states, "We have been informed by the inquisitors and by other persons that the mingling of Jews with Christians leads to the worst evils." So, over the years, as sentiment against the Jews grew, the distinction between these groups became blurred, and that between converted and non-converted Jews seemed to disappear. Their bad blood, mala sangre, many thought made all the Jews, whether converted or not, evil and perverse. Now this is genetic racism at its finest, and it was perpetrated by the Catholic Church. And everybody who was Catholic, especially in Spain, that's what they believed, because the Spanish, as you're about to find out, had a really big deal about blood and who you were related to. Eventually, it continues to say, limpieza de sangre, purity of blood was a major concern. Purity of blood? So that's rather like how Adolf Hitler used to think, wasn't it? Purity of the Aryan race. Yeah, the purity of blood was a major concern. The bad blood made them evil and perverse. This is just pure out-and-out racism. Judaism had not become only a religious problem, but an ethnic one as well. It was in this context that Ignatius of Loyola, the seventh son of an old Basque family, the Onaz of Loyola, hardly 1 year before the edict of expulsion was signed, so he cannot be a Jew. It's just impossible, because the genetic test done in 2015 proves that they've had the same bloodline for thousands of years. So it goes on. He probably met no Jews during his childhood in Spain. The first mention of any kind of connection that he might have had with Jews or Jewish Christians does not occur until he was interrogated by the Inquisition soon after his conversion. Here perhaps is his early attitude towards Jewish Christians revealed. So Ignatius, while at Alcala studying and giving the spiritual exercises, Ignatius was investigated 3 times by the Inquisition. You would think if the Inquisition investigated him 3 times for being possibly a crypto Jew, that they would have found out. Polanco in his Vita Ignati Loyolae records the interrogation as follows. When after the time described, the vicar Figuero came to question him, and among other things asked him if he recommended observance of the Sabbath, that is Saturday, Ignatius replied, "For Saturdays I recommend special devotion to Our Lady, and I know of no other observances for Saturday. Moreover, in my country, there are no Jews." So, how can he be a Jew if there's no Jews in the country, and for the past hundreds of years have been persecuted? There's a Purity of Blood Act signed into law, which, by the way, was only taken out of law in the 20th century. Doubtful of Ignatius' origins, Figuero had dared to ask in veiled terms if his suspect were not indeed a converso who remained faithful to the Jewish devotions. Although it is difficult to say precisely what Ignatius intended by his response, it would not be entirely unlikely that his answer to Vicar Figuero indicates that the Basque from Loyola in the province of, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Guipuzcoa? I don't know.
Guipúzcoa.
Found the suggestion offensive. This would certainly be in keeping with the attitude of most Guipuzcoans, who boasted that no Jew was even allowed to remain overnight in their province. Perhaps Ignatius too shared the sentiments of his fellow Guipuzcoans, who assumed a superior stand to even old Christians from other Spanish provinces. So his whole region and where he's from, they were basically racist towards the Jews. They weren't even allowed to stay there overnight in the province. And some people would like me to believe that Ignatius Loyola was a crypto Jew, and that somewhere in his Spanish noble racist family, the Onaz of Loyola, somewhere they married a Marrano and had babies. It's just not true. But that brings me to the final point I would like to make. Not until his years of study at the University of Paris did Ignatius' more mature attitude become gradually recognisable. There he met Diego Leones. Though his Christian faith descended from 3 generations, Diego, because of his great-grandfather's Jewish origin, was still considered a Jew. So this information about Diego Leones will no doubt get the conspiracy theorists who want to blame everything on the Jews saying, see, the Jesuits were Jews. Yeah, but that's not true. That was only one guy, Diego Leones, right? And if you guys had known this, you would have brought it up already. Diego Leones ended up becoming the second superior general after Ignatius Loyola died. So, what then, are we to think that the Jesuits were Jews because of this? I think not. Because even though Ignatius Loyola was favourable towards the Jews, the Pope eventually enacted a papal bull which Ignatius did not object to. Until 1555, Ignatius had dealt only with Jews who wished to convert. The issue of the bull Cum Nimi Absurdum, with its unparalleled restrictions on the Jews of Rome, provides us with the opportunity to see Ignatius' attitude towards Jews who had no intention of converting. Issued in 1555 by Pope Paul IV, the papal document mirrors what many 16th century theologians had to say about the Jews. You can pause it and read it. To overcome the evil power the Jews were gaining, the Holy See instituted measures of unprecedented harshness. The first of these was the establishment, for the first time in Rome and other papal cities, of obligatory Jewish quarters. After more than 1500 years of continuous residence in Rome, the Jews were to live in a ghetto with only one gate to enter by. That's right, folks. The Holy Roman Empire was the one that started the Jewish ghettos. It did not come by the Nazis. It was the Holy Roman Empire. Speaking of Nazis though, there was one famous Jew that lived in a German ghetto, a Holy Roman Empire Jewish ghetto, and that was Mayer D. Rothschild. It goes on to say, all synagogues except one in each city were to be destroyed, and all Jews were to wear badges to indicate their Jewishness. And Ignatius Loyola went along with it to defend it. So in 1555, and for many years afterward, the Pope, as head of the government of the Papal States, quite openly violated the equality and human dignity of the Jews, and precisely for religious reasons. When the bull was published, Ignatius sent copies of it far and wide, with instructions to pass them around to other Jesuit houses after they had been read. In this way, he not only helped promulgate the bull, but he seems to have agreed with it. So there was some Jesuits that were Jews, but they were not crypto-Jews. It was well known that these people were new Christians. They did not practice Judaism, because if they did, they would have been treated like how Rome treated Jews who refused to convert. They would have been killed or expelled from the land. And Loyola was in favour of that, to protect the one true faith. What happened next? Does this give ammo to fire at the Jewish New World Order? Well, it would certainly seem that way. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because there's still a lot of history that follows the appointment of a Jew, or at least by ancestry, Diego Leones, to the Superior General. What happened after that, however, should be taken note of, and here we go. The press for restrictive legislation did not stop at the death of the first general, that's Loyola. Even in the time of Leones, the second superior general of the Jesuits, who was himself of Jewish blood, there were renewed attempts to restrict admission of new Christians to the society. The third general, Francis Borgia, also endured and resisted the same harangue as Ignatius from advocates in Spain of the purity of blood. But it was not until the time of the fifth general, Claudio Acquaviva that those who sought to exclude anyone from Jewish lineage finally won out. In 1592, Acquaviva wrote to the provincials of Spain, that's the Jesuits, ordering them not to receive new Christians into the society. The final blow to the Ignatian attitude of openness came in 1593 at the Fifth General Congregation, that's where they decide the Superior General. With the passage of its Decree 52, no one of Jewish or Muslim backgrounds could ever enter the society. Further, not even the general could dispense from this impediment. The characteristic outlook of the Spanish elite had finally won out. In a similar fashion, the impediment of origin remained unchanged from 1593 until well into our 20th century. It was 1946 to be exact, as we see here. The General Congregation, convened in 1946, as soon as possible after the close of World War II, abrogated the impediment of origin. So you can see that from 1593 to 1946, no Jew or Muslim was allowed in the Jesuits. There was only a few of them originally, and they were not crypto-Jews. It was well known that they were Jews, they were not hidden. So this, I feel, goes a long way to debunking any notion that Zionist Jews created the Jesuits. The Jesuits wanted to convert Jews and kill anyone that didn't.